Imagine a room charged with the raw energy of revolution. Voices that shook the foundations of a nation, converging: Angela Davis, the intellectual warrior; Kwame Ture, the fiery advocate of black power; and Fannie Lou Hamer, the embodiment of grassroots resilience. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a strategic summit, a battleground of ideas, a raw, unfiltered examination of the black liberation struggle. In the heart of a nation still reeling from the civil rights movement, these titans of thought grappled with the unyielding realities of oppression. They laid bare the uncomfortable truths, dissecting the fractures within leadership, the insidious grip of economic exploitation, and the elusive quest for true unity. Power to the people, they echoed. But how do you forge a united front when the very systems you fight are designed to divide? How do you wield power when the economic chains of oppression bind your community? This wasn't a seminar, it was a call to arms. They weren't just discussing theories. They were outlining strategies, demanding actionable solutions, and anticipating the inevitable unrest that would follow. Know your enemy, they insisted, understanding that racism wasn't just a matter of prejudice, but a weapon of economic control. Decades later, their words resonate with an unsettling urgency. The questions they posed about leadership, unity, and the economics of oppression remain as vital today as they were in 1973. This discussion isn't just a historical artifact, it's a living document, a blueprint for those still fighting for justice. So, prepare to step back in time, to witness a pivotal moment in the ongoing struggle. Prepare to confront uncomfortable truths, and to be challenged to think critically about the path to liberation. This is more than a discussion, it's a legacy. Let's delve into the heart of this transformative dialogue.
The name is Diallo, D-I-A-L-L-O, Mahmoud, M-A-H-M-O-U-D. And I'm calling from Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And my question is to Stokely Carmichael, to Angela Davis, and to President Nixon's special advisor, whom I cannot recall the name. Okay. I want to know how they feel about psychiatrist Francis Weslin's theory of...
Excuse me, would you deposit $1.05 for the last 5 minutes?
Okay, I will, please. Hello?
Yeah?
Could you let me finish my question before?
Capitalism.
Well, we have to collect for, for 5 minutes. You're not being charged while I collect.
Okay. Hey, what's that?
$1.05.
In Cuba, telephones are free. For those who haven't. Let's give it to everybody. What to do?
Sorry about that interruption. That's okay. Diallo Mahmoud from Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And Francis Weslin, who is a psychiatrist, had an interview with Black Journal about 3 weeks ago. And she has developed an attractive theory of black superiority of white people.
Brother, would you just give me your question, please?
Okay, and my question is, how does Stokely Carmichael, Angela Davis, and President Nixon's advisor feel about this theory? And do they agree or disagree with it, and why?
Let me attempt to paraphrase that. First of all, for the caller, as I stated, President Nixon's advisor was unable to be here. However, Mr. Carmichael and Ms. Davis might want to respond. He's referring to Dr. Francis Welsing, who is a black psychiatrist, who says that white racism is due to the fact that whites do not hate blacks because blacks are black. Whites hate blacks because whites are not black. And that racism is a reaction formation to something that you can't be and can't have. And that the state of whiteness is, in essence, a state of genetic deficiency and a state of albinism.
Well, first of all, I would say that in trying to understand what racism is all about, we have to look at history, because as in the other institution, racism is a historical phenomenon. And it developed in conjunction with the development of capitalism. If you look at this country in particular, you see that the whole ideological network of racism arose in order to justify the use of black slaves, the kidnapping of black people from Africa and the use of black slaves in order to lay the basis for an agricultural capitalism in the South, and then eventually in order to provide for the capitalist system in this country a group of people who could be super exploited, who could be used as a reserve labor force. And I think it's important to recognize the fact that the reason why those who presume to be the leaders of this country have resorted so consistently to racism is because of the fact that it assists the ruling class to reap more profits. Let me just give you an example. If you look at the wage differential of black workers and white workers, you have something like $21 billion. If you add Chicanos and Indians and Puerto Ricans and other people of color, you get about $28 billion. Now that $28 billion means a lot to the capitalists of this country. But racism also serves another purpose, and I think it's important to understand this. Racism is used by the rulers of this country in order to convince white people who are also, the masses of white people are also exploited. They aren't exploited as we are, and they are not, there is a qualitative difference in the sense that we are racially and nationally oppressed, whereas white people are not. But white people, the masses of white people are working people, and the fruits of their labor are robbed by the capitalists. But you see, when the worker is focusing all of his attention, the white worker, on black people, and when he thinks that the reason why he is now unemployed is because of the fact that there's a system which gives black people in certain industries job priorities, and when Nixon and all of the others are able to sick white workers on black workers, then they have created a situation where the white worker is not even going to think about the fact that he's being exploited by the capitalists. I mean, I think that the whole question of dividing and ruling has been one of the ways in which the oppressors historically have most efficiently dominated. Racism serves the ruling class in precisely that way. And I think that right now, in this country today, racism is perhaps the fundamental question we're facing. And white people have to understand this, because white people have to understand that they have to wage on their own initiative a struggle against the racism which is also used in order to make it in order to facilitate their own exploitation by those who dominate this country.
Stokely, would you like to respond?
Well, I would say that I imagine that my sister Frances had a lot of examples and certainly documentary facts to back up her theory, and I wouldn't get into disagreeing or agreeing with her. What I would ask is, how do we destroy it? While that may be the major problem, I'll grant her that. Let's say that is the major problem. White people are able to enforce racism through capitalism. That's how they amass their power. And racism is really a question of power. That's all it is. It's whether or not one race has more power to inflict punishment on another. For example, if a white boy wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If he lynches me, it's my problem. Thus, it behooves me to build as much power as I can to protect myself against racism, and also to destroy the base that gives the racist the reality, power, the power reality to lynch me or to inflict power upon me. He amasses that through capitalism. Thus, it is my job to thoroughly dismantle that system, which will render him powerless. And once he's rendered powerless, then perhaps we can begin to deal with the question of racism. So I wouldn't, again, the question of, there's no doubt that the major problem that the black man faces all over the world is a problem of economic exploitation. That's the core question. The answer is, how do you get to it? I know that the only way you can get to it is through politics. You must first politically organize before you can amass the economic power.
May we take two quick responses from Judge Booth and Mr. Sutton, and then go
I just want to say that much of the attack here today, this evening, has been on Nixon. And I think everybody should know that we're not just on Nixon, we're on the entire society, the entire system as it operates. And I have had a chance to go to South Africa and to Namibia on a couple of occasions, and I've seen how our government, not just the president, but the Congress, the courts, and everything else, our government is sponsoring the racist regime in South Africa and in Namibia. I don't know, I think the media is responsible to a great degree because the media of this country, the press, television, radio, magazines, all of it, have kept from the American public the link between South Africa and the United States. I have found in my dealings in the American Committee on Africa and otherwise, that, for example, our Defense Department permits the South African Post Office to use our tracking station in Pretoria, South Africa, for communication purposes. And for communication purposes in order to deal with the black people of South Africa who are now rising up. There is a war on in all of Southern Africa, and the United States is helping the racist regimes there to win the war against black folks by permitting free of charge, the South African Post Office to tack in to our tracking station in Pretoria. We are using the American government and all the American people and the all American tax dollars to help racism there. We likewise are sending ships, airplanes to Portugal so they can use them against black people in Angola and Mozambique. We're doing a great deal of these kinds of things. We're selling herbicides, and we're covering it up by selling these things to private companies, which in turn turn it over to the government and use them against black people in South Africa. And I think that maybe we ought to try to get these facts across to the American people, and particularly to the black American people, so that they can use them to dismantle if we want to. Look, Stokely, you go your way. And I think we can go different ways if we want to, but we've got to recognize we've got the same goal. And however way each of us want to go, we ought to recognize that we do have similar goals and we can work toward the same end.
Sir, I've always been for unity in the black community, will always be for it. Our party, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, has been calling for a black united front, the meetings of all black people, irrespective of ideology. We want our people free. Thus, for example, I think this is very beautiful. It's unfortunate we can't get this unless someone calls us to be on TV. But I've always been for that. I learned that from Dr. King and from Malcolm X.
The Newark Black Power Conference, of course, 67 and all the rest since then have indicated the same kind of thing.
May we have a response from Mr. Sutton?
The question I believe phoned in was whether or not one agreed with the philosophy that racism, white racism, is an anger on the part of whites because they're not black. I don't think that at all. I quite agree with my sister Angela Davis that racism is really a matter of exploitation. It's an economic thing, and whether it's in South Africa or South United States or Northern United States, it is a method of exploitation, and the exploitation does not really benefit the whites. That is not the white working class.
Maybe I did disservice in, and I'm sure I did now, in recalling the theory, because what Dr. Welsing said was that race was the dynamic around which the political and the social system was organized to oppress blacks.
Well, that makes a difference.
Yes.
That does make a difference.
Yes, it does make a difference in the question.
Okay, can we have a short remark and then take the next question? Nelson?
Yeah, my comment was on the same question. And I think it's important in terms of the solution or the approach to solving the problem, created by racism, that we come to some clarification again on what it is and where it comes from. And I'm referring to Stokely's comments about, that perhaps was not central. And I'm saying that you can't really devise a strategy to begin to deal with the problem of racism in the society without a comprehension of its source, because and why it's there, where it comes from, the motive forces that created it. And again, I think that leads us back to what Angela said as a point of departure, in our efforts to dismantle racism.
All right. Next question, please.
Robert Alexander, San Antonio, Texas. Is it possible to persuade existing black organizations to assign appropriate staff from each of these organizations to convene and develop for presentation a cogent list of priorities? Would it be possible, once this list of priorities has been developed, to utilize the network of organizational units such as NACP, Urban League, SCLC, CORE, so forth, and the black colleges in this country to verify this list of priorities as being relevant to our cause, and then to rally the blacks in this country to begin promoting the activities at the local, state, state and national level to culminate as a national agenda by 1976, the 200th anniversary of the birth of our country?
Difficulty hearing, I will restate his question. Is it possible to persuade existing black organizations to assign appropriate staffs from each of these organizations to convene and develop for presentation a cogent list of priorities? Would it be possible, once this list of priorities has been developed, to utilize the network of organizational units such as NAACP, Urban League, SCLC, CORE, so forth, and the black colleges in this country to verify this list of priorities and being relevant to our cause, and then to rally the blacks in this country to begin promoting the activities at the local, state, and national levels to culminate as a national agenda by 1976, the 200th anniversary of the birth of our country? Congressman Stokes, would you stab at that?
I think the gentleman's suggestion has merit. What he is, in effect, talking about is coalitions within the black community itself. When we talk politically of being able to acquire a real political power, we talk in terms of coalitions, where you put white people, black people, Puerto Ricans, Chicanos, white liberals, poor whites all together, and through this process you acquire political power. And it seems to me that when you talk in terms of being able to form coalitions between the races, obviously you ought to be able to form a coalition within the race in terms of unity for the race. So I think the gentleman has merit and that it could well be explored.
Isn't that what we've been doing through the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights? Although it's kind of failed, it seems, in recent years. Also in the Black Political Assembly, and there are other attempts that have been made. I think what he's saying is that we've got to make it work, and that's our function.
As I said, he's asking for something, I think, a little more sophisticated than what has presently been attempted, and that is to come up with the priorities and then put it in the hands of people who are professional thinkers, and then establish the priorities, and then come back to the leadership, organizational leadership, and have goals and objects for 1976 to some sophisticated solution.
We've been having national goals and national priorities prepared since Niagara Conference to Gary. And I think the basic kinds of issues that the black and poor community is faced with, everybody accepts as priorities. So if we're talking about make that a national goal for 1976, they have been the national goal at least since I've understood.
Well, are you satisfied with the implementation of these goals?
No, absolutely not satisfied with the implementation, not even satisfied with the approach to them. What I think we should avoid doing, however, though, is getting ourselves in another study bag where we go back and come back with data and what have you, and we sit down and all agree that those are the problems.
But he gives a cutoff date. He says 1976.
I'd like to give tomorrow.
There are very few holes in his question.
My concern is that the cutoff date is yesterday or tomorrow.
Well, in terms of realism, we have not solved our problems to this date, and he's asking for black leaders and black organizations to give him some plan and give him some date for completion of this work.
Let me address one very important point, though. The Gary Convention came out with a set of listed priorities, whether we agreed or disagreed, those conditions existed in certain places. The Congressional Black Caucus, who after a number of exhausted hearings involving all parts of community thinking, came down also with a list of priorities which was addressed to the National Congress in their State of the Nation message, I believe, in the earlier part of the Congress. Now, anybody who takes a look at what was said there recognizes these to be problems. I don't see the need to have some sort of convening again of black leadership. Part of our problem, Tony, is that we traditionally convene leadership and forget to convene people.
All right, let me be the devil's advocate. Here we are sitting, and perhaps some of you feel a little nervous about being called leaders, but you are, because the term has been stigmatized, and I can understand it. But let's be practical. Here's Mrs. Hamer, who is in the middle of Mississippi. They have a farm corporation. Their farmland, their cotton is underwater. They're starving. Now, what actually do organizations do specifically? 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you send 4 loaves of bread and two ham hocks? Do you go down and, I mean, in terms of saying, well, yes, our brothers and sisters in the rural South are starving. That's an abstract. Now, what do we do? How do we move from nothing to one? This is, I think, the substance of what this brother is asking. I just don't see it not being a legitimate concern.
I'm saying let's talk about a disaster situation, and we talk about the federal government as the institution to relieve that disaster, or local government. What I'm saying is that there is a clear procedure to follow in that situation. For instance, our illustrious leader has declared certain parts of it a disaster area, so fine. The machinery of the Red Cross or whoever cranks up and does something.
But if they had been Jews, the national Jewish community would have fed them. Israel would have aided them. This is, we say on one hand that we can't depend on the federal government. Then when a black person's in trouble, we say the federal government should do something.
I think another point that in terms of our past experience with disaster areas, and I think that perhaps we can advance this discussion a little further using this example, is that in the past when we have had disaster areas in the South, Mississippi in particular, the federal government has acted in a discriminatory fashion in administering disaster aid. And one of the things that was needed then was close monitoring by a concerned black community, by skilled black people to go in and at first address the immediate problems that the people had, but as well to make the federal government live up to the standards that it had enunciated for itself.
Not only that, I think that many times we don't understand that unity is a struggle. Because when the black man tries to unify, it is obvious and expected and understood that the white power structure of this country does not want that to happen. Thus, they move in many different ways, not avert, but rather cover to keep the black people divided. Thus, we have a responsibility. You know, if we tried last year and we didn't do it, we tried the year before, we will keep trying because we got to do it. Right. We got to do it.
What is the alternative?
And the other question is that on the question of leaders versus people, it is just a simple systematic way of organizing. You represent the state, county, federal, municipal employees. That's a large number of black people in this country and other people, okay? But large number of black people, undeniably so. You represent that sector. Brother Nelson represents Yobu, which is an organizing group that's all over the country. That's a sector that he represents. The Honorable Percy Sutton, our brother here, represents Harlem. That's a fact. Brother Stokes represents a constituency in Ohio. That's a fact. If these people sit down and come together, they will create an atmosphere in which your constituency, his constituency will now be inspired to come together. Thus, we have to understand what it's about. Just bringing the leaders together is to set an atmosphere of unity. Because when your constituency, when Brother Sutton's constituency, when Brother Stokes' constituency look up to those who they see as national leaders, they see them divided. Thus, it demobilizes them. But if they saw us in constant contact, they would be inspired, and thus we would speed up the process of organizing the very people.
But it's important we understand. I was not saying...
Could we make our remarks short?
I was not saying that leaders should not come together. My concern is to not become bogged down in 4 or 5 years of trying to determine priorities. For instance, when the administration came in with their wage price guidelines, more wage control, that was an instant kind of thing that poor people were confronted with. Not rich people, not doctors, not bankers, where interest rates, profits, but wages. I'm saying we've got to be prepared to deal with that. For instance, the power hunks in the country immediately moved. Steel workers, auto workers, whoever was necessary to relieve the pressure from their people, they could move to get themselves exempted or excluded.
We must be unified.
It's not necessary to be unified. We must be powerful.
All right, thank you.
Well, you're going to get power from unity.
All right. Brother Sutton?
Only way we're going to get it.
Tony, you pointed out just then with regard to the Jewish community that had there happened within the realm of the interest of the Jewish community that which happens, and you're mentioning in Mississippi to Fannie Lou Hamer, there would have been a different response. We're talking about monitoring the federal government in what it gives. And the Jewish community would have been talking about monitoring the federal government in what it gives, but also in themselves doing something. We have not reached that point in our development, and it goes back to what Angela Davis has said. It is all economic, because until we're able to organize ourselves in whatever movement we have, whatever philosophies we have, to move economically to structure the brother or sister is not going to listen to you or to any of us unless we can change the condition of his life, either create a socialist system for him or make his life better in the capitalist system.
Would you accept the Nation of Islam as an example of that?
As an example of what?
As an example of blacks developing the second statement in your analysis.
Yeah, I think, let me just say this, I think the Nation of Islam moves towards what I should like to see. It moves towards doing something for the economic side of black people. Unfortunately, it has not had the impact many of us would wish it would have. And I guess the reason it has not had that impact is because there are not yet a sufficient number of believers. I think Charles and Mary Beard said many years ago the problem with regard to the white work in America is that it was not sufficiently class conscious. I think the problem with black people in America is that we're not sufficiently class conscious. We still keep believing that we're going to make it in the system.
Brother Williams?
The problem of, I want to get back to that question, the problem of setting priorities or developing a national black agenda, I don't think is a difficult one for black people and black groups. I think that the difficulty lies whenever we began our attempt to implement these agendas and priorities. And here is when our ideological differences began to interfere with our ability to function as a collective group. Now, the question also of unity, I think that we must understand that we are a large group of people, something like 40 to 50 million in this country, and there are going to always be differences of opinion. I think our primary concern should be developing some kind of mechanism for operational unity. In other words, when we come up with that national black agenda, with those priorities, then we, despite our different ideologies, should have that kind of mechanism that will embrace all these ideologies so that we can implement the national black agenda. And I think that here where we break down as a collective group, and that can be clearly seen right now in terms of our different political ideologies. Now, for instance, we are constantly loyal to the Democratic Party. We are constantly dampering with the Republican Party. We are constantly we are maintaining a permanent coalition with the white racist union that is one of our greatest enemies in this particular country in terms of keeping black people out of the union and subsequently keeping them unemployed. And I think as black people, you see, if we were to come together, it would be a big argument as to where our loyalty should lie. It would not be with our black goals and objectives, it would be because of these various attachments that we have. And I think that until we develop to the point where our loyalty will be with black people, and we, in terms of our affiliation with any other group, we see that as a tactic and a strategy, and do not let this deter us, I think we would be more effective in implementing the concept.
We must move on. We are running short of time, and I will plead one more time for us to please make our remarks very cogent and not get into this, because I know all of you are very gifted in this respect. Congressman Stokes, would you care to comment?
No, I just wanted to add one additional point to what my brother here has said. Someone a few moments ago mentioned the Jewish people. Now, they may differ ideologically or philosophically about many things. The one thing they all agree upon is Israel. And it seems to me there's a lesson in that for black people.
That's not true.
Okay, but all right.
That's not true. That's not.
May we? Okay.
Very few disagree.
All right, may we have a comment from him, and then I think
they're in a minority.
I think we do.
Few disagree.
That's right.
I think we do owe it to those who have phoned in questions to try to handle those questions out of courtesy. So could we very expeditiously move toward that? And Mr. Williams, you've been trying to make a point.
Just one point that I hope your viewers don't get the impression from what's been said so far that there is no cooperation in the black community. You know, because I think, you know, that they might feel that way, that all of us are doing our own thing and we, you know, we never relate to one another. And I've got to insist, you know, that we do cooperate, that we do form coalitions. So, you know, it isn't as splendid as it might appear.
No, if we don't form coalitions, one has been formed for us.
Well, yeah, by birth.
That's what I mean.
That's trouble. Many times we think we've got something going, and the buck that has caused us to get into those hotels and have those meetings and caucuses and seminars and all the rest has come from the white community without our knowledge sometimes, without the knowledge of some of us. And so therefore the conference takes a tack that is totally different. And also splits us up, too, because of our ideologies. It makes us think about ourselves as being different. We're not. We've got a great deal to work with.
We're going to have one short remark from Ms. Burrell, and then we'll go to the next question.
I think one of the things that needs to be said, Tony, is the fact that political power and the ownership of capital seem somehow to be handmaidens. I think we agreed. I think I've heard that about 4 times here. Well, if that's true, then you decide which one of those comes first. I'm sure that you'd better have some money before the political power comes. I think that's what the congressman talked about a little bit earlier. Little old ladies in tennis shoes that get 20,000 votes for a candidate don't have access to him. but some guy that gave $20,000 does, and that's the difference. And it comes as a result of the ownership of business. And if we're talking about the ownership of capital, then that gets to be important. And all capitalists don't have to own a little grocery store. I mean, there's a broad middle class in this country.
They're not capitalists.
Okay.
Well, but
They're not capitalists.
But my point to answer
Mr. Sutton said they could get to see him. Okay, thank you. All right, may we have the next question, please?
My name is Marva Dorsey. I live in San Francisco. And my question was, with the war ending in Vietnam and unemployment, the rate of unemployment climbing as it has, does anyone on the panel see a possibility of race riots occurring across the country?
The question was, with the war in Vietnam ending and unemployment, I assume, rising, the rate of unemployment climbing as it has, does anyone see the possibility of race riots occurring across the country?
Certainly. Certainly. The potential is here. We've put all this money for so many years into Vietnam, fighting a war in a place that we shouldn't be fighting, intervening in a civil disagreement is really what it is there, and yet doing nothing to structure people as they come back here. Grand unemployment, with the Nixon administration leading in an attitude to continue to do nothing, cutbacks all along the line. Right here in the city of New York just recently, I think we might have had a riot where a policeman shot a 10-year-old boy in the back. There was great disorder in the vicinity of the house in which the youngster lived. Now, if the Nixon administration continues its cutback, and had this been summertime when that youngster was shot in the back, I think you might have found a riot right here in New York.
Let me clarify the fine language of this question. And the question says race riots. It doesn't, this question doesn't say the rebellions of the 60s in which blacks were burning up their own houses and, you know, robbing liquor stores.
No, let me carry it to,
right.
Let me respond to that. I don't think if we have riots again, I think blacks are much more sophisticated than we were in the early 60s. And much more bold than we were in the early 60s. And I don't think the disorders are going to be confined to black communities. There are a lot of brothers and sisters who are much more bold than before, who will carry the disorders, if we want to term them that, into the white community, to the downtown banks, to the where the power structure is. Yes, I think there's a grand possibility of disorder and race riots. I would hope not.
Well, I think that we have a responsibility, because no doubt the atmosphere is that we have a responsibility to construct that consciousness that will now rise, and to guide it in whatever channels we see, irrespective of whether we say we're violent or nonviolent. I think we do have a responsibility to try and channel that.
Right, because while we can agree on an increase in racism, I think it would be inappropriate to draw the conclusion that that will manifest itself in race riots, and in fact, it becomes our responsibility to work to make sure it does not.
Let's see if I understood the question, whether there was a possibility.
Yes.
And my answer, yes, was a possibility.
Well, I agree with you.
As related to
unemployment. That we have an obligation,
right.
Of course we
a responsibility to channel it. Now, it can take different forms.
All right, gentlemen,
Mrs. Heyman. It's things that I really don't understand about that war, because I've never seen the war end and people still shooting. Now, I don't understand that. You know, when they make that clear to me, then I really want somebody to clarify that, because, and number two, I couldn't understand why so many black men were sent over there to fight, and everybody I seen talking that got off of them planes was white men. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of things that I don't understand about that. You know, and, well, you know, this is enough to make people upset, because that upset me. That upset other people, because I do know that it was more than white people went to Vietnam. And I know that, you know, somebody else should have been, you know, it was two things that really upset a lot of people in the South. And I can't understand, if the war is over and the prisoners home, why are they still shooting?
I think the point is clear. The war in Southeast Asia is still going on, but as well, there is now an increased war here at home in terms of the conditions that people are having to live under and the conditions that returning veterans are having to face. As part of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, I traveled in Asia very recently, and talked to many of the black servicemen and women in the brigs and the stockades and in the courts, and talked to them in their barracks. And I checked out as well the situation here in the United States, people who are about to be released under administrative discharges and the whole range of less than honorable discharges that the system has put upon these people. And I think that not only do we have to take Sister Hamer's point about the war going on in Southeast Asia, there's a war going on right here in the United States in terms of the conditions that these people are going to have to face when they come out and the kind of lives that they're going to be forced to live. And I think that has implications not only for the black community, but for the entire American community.
I'd just like to say to Ms. Hamer that war was going on when we got there. They were shooting when we got there, and now that we've left, they're still shooting. And I wish we'd left that part out that comes in between. I wish we'd never joined the shooting, and let's let them keep on shooting like they're doing now.
It's capitalism that sent us
Okay,
here.
thank you.
Okay, well, I can't.
The next question, please.
I didn't do it, Stokely.
Mrs. Hamer's point is that they have not really left.
May we have the next question, please?
Still there.
My name is Ronald Woodson. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Question is, I want to know, would it be feasible and would it be much more beneficial to black people if we had, as we say we have, a home to call our own, like Africa, like we could relate to our brothers in Africa as do the Jews do to Israel? Would this give us more of a nation kind of feeling than the direction we are now presently taking in this country?
I think, Mr. Carmichael, we're all waiting on you to answer that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My brother, I thank you. Africa is our home. Africa is our mother. Undeniably, it is our home. I think that we get confused, and that's why our struggle becomes so confused, because a nationalist pre-awakening is a necessity for anti-imperialist struggle. All countries go through their nationalist stage before they go into that serious, the Vietnamese, the Chinese, the Cubans. And our problem is that we don't really understand nationalism. When you say nation, you talk about land. Our land is Africa. That's undeniable. This land is not our land. This land is not our land. This land is not the white man's land. He's just a European settler on this land. This land is the red man's land. And the red man will raise contradictions to get his land back. And when it does, black people have to be crystal clear what our position is. The red man fighting in Wounded Knee right now, our position can only be but one. We support him to reclaim his land, while we also wage our struggle to take back our land. Now, the way people now ask the question is, well, Brother Stokely, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to leave America and go to Africa? I think that's an incorrect way of phrasing the question. Once we understand that Africa is our home, then the way we raise the question is, Brother Stokely, I'm in America. What can I do to help home? Right. Now, once the question is raised that way, then we see it more clearly. But it's undeniable that when you fight revolution, you fight for land.
Thank you.
Fight for land.
Very few minutes. I'm going to try to get to another question. Next question, please.
My name is Deidre Carter, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And my question is on census taking and the fact that from 1900 to 1970, according to the World Almanac, the Negro Almanac, and census, why we have still remained 10% to 11% of the total population, and exactly who is the minority on a national and an international scale.
Thank you very much.
She was asking, in essence, are we the minority or the majority on an international scale?
All I know is right here where we are, we're in the minority, but we may be, as a part of black people and brown people, in
Worldwide.
the majority worldwide.
Even as black people, we're the majority.
I think we have time for one more question. We have a very few seconds.
My name is Osoro Lewis. You got that?
Yes.
And one of the questions is directed to Stokely Carmichael.
Yeah,
which is, how can you be in Africa and America at the same time?
Could you answer that very succinctly? I'm sure there's a very short answer to that.
Very simply. When I was in Africa for the last 4 years, my mother was in America and she was in Trinidad. But she's my mother. I have a responsibility to take care of her. I took care of my mother wherever she was. For my brother, I would tell him that he should read the works of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, and he will see that the Honorable Marcus Garvey never saw Africa, never saw it. Yet it is undeniable that the Honorable Marcus Garvey worked harder for Africa than any man in his lifetime during that period, and he never saw
We have a few seconds. Angela, let me ask you, what is your involvement now in the political prisoner movement specifically? We have about a half a minute.
Well, we are trying to build a movement embracing all of those thousands and tens of thousands who supported me, as well as anybody else who can see the need to free more political prisoners and victims of political repression. We're talking about fighting around the case of Ruchell McGee, the San Quentin Six, Carlos Feliciano, Rap Brown right here in New York. I was visiting just
Angela,
a few days ago Ruchell McGee in San Quentin.
I hate to interrupt you. I feel like the bad guy on this program, but it's been very interesting, and I'm sure the audience has gotten some tremendous insights. Black Journal would like to thank you for coming and giving us your ability and your wisdom.
Well, we thank you for helping to bring us together. If even on this level, it will now inspire us to work harder to unite amongst ourselves.
Amen, brother.
The discussion begins by identifying a critical obstacle: confusion in leadership. This confusion, it is argued, directly contributes to community challenges. In any movement, clear and cohesive leadership is paramount. Disagreements and diverse philosophies are inevitable, but a lack of clarity in objectives and strategies can paralyze progress. The context, following the civil rights movement and amidst the rise of Black Power, was undoubtedly fraught with ideological diversity. This diversity, while potentially a source of strength, could also become a point of fracture if not navigated effectively. A central theme of unity emerges as a crucial necessity. However, the discussion wisely recognizes that unity is not a monolithic concept. It cannot be imposed or dictated universally. Instead, it must be individually defined and nurtured. This implies a recognition of the diverse experiences and perspectives within the Black community. It also suggests that unity should be built on shared goals and a commitment to collective liberation, rather than enforced conformity. The path to unity, however, is not without its obstacles. The discussion acknowledges the disunity factors that plague Black leadership. These factors likely include ideological differences, personal rivalries, and the lingering effects of systemic oppression. Overcoming these divisions requires honest dialogue, a willingness to compromise, and a shared understanding of the common enemy. Moreover, acquiring power is posited as a necessary component of achieving unity. This power is not merely political. It encompasses economic, social, and cultural influence. The discussion then pivots to the economic underpinnings of racism. Racism, it is argued, is not simply a matter of prejudice or discrimination. It is a tool of exploitation wielded by the ruling class. By exploiting Black workers and diverting attention from class issues, racism serves to maintain the capitalist system. This analysis echoes the Marxist perspective championed by Angela Davis, who consistently emphasized the interconnectedness of race and class oppression. Understanding these roots is crucial for developing effective strategies to combat oppression. The need for actionable strategies is underscored. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the participants call for concrete plans and initiatives from Black leaders. Mere rhetoric is insufficient. Tangible actions are required to address the pressing needs of the community. This focus on action highlights the practical dimension of the liberation struggle. The discussion further explores the challenges of federal aid and disaster relief in the Black community. This point likely refers to the systemic inequalities that often leave Black communities disproportionately vulnerable to natural disasters and other crises. The lack of adequate resources and support from government agencies exacerbates these vulnerabilities, highlighting the need for self-reliance and community-based solutions. Economic empowerment is identified as a crucial component of Black leadership. This empowerment encompasses ownership of capital, control over resources, and the development of sustainable economic models. The connection between economic power and political power is explicitly acknowledged. Without economic independence, political influence remains limited. This understanding underscores the importance of building Black-owned businesses, supporting Black entrepreneurs, and promoting financial literacy within the community. The discussion also anticipates the potential for increased tensions and broader unrest. This prediction proved prescient. The decades that followed witnessed numerous instances of social unrest and protests often sparked by racial injustice. The participants' awareness of this potential underscores the urgency of addressing the root causes of oppression. Finally, the discussion delves into the complexities of nationalism and anti-imperialism. Understanding nationalism is deemed crucial for the Black community's struggle against imperialism. This suggests a recognition of the global dimensions of oppression and the need for solidarity with other oppressed peoples. The discussion concludes with a reflection on identity, responsibility, and political activism among Black leaders. This emphasis on personal responsibility and active engagement underscores the importance of individual commitment to the collective struggle. This conversation is a chillingly relevant mirror reflecting the contemporary landscape of racial fights and struggles in America and the world. The issues they grappled with then fractured leadership, the insidious grip of economic exploitation, and the elusive quest for true unity are. the very battles being waged on our streets and in our communities today. The echoes of confusion in leadership resonate loudly in the era of social media activism and decentralized movements. While these platforms amplify voices, they also present the challenge of coordinating action and maintaining a cohesive message. We see this in the debates over tactics, the fragmentation of activist groups, and the struggle to translate online momentum into tangible political change. The need for a nuanced understanding of unity, as emphasized in the 1973 discussion, is paramount. Today, it translates to building bridges across generational divides, ideological differences, and diverse identities within the Black community and allied movements. The economic analysis of racism, so central to the 1973 conversation, remains devastatingly pertinent. The wealth gap, the disproportionate impact of economic downturns on Black communities, and the ongoing struggle for equitable access to education and employment are stark reminders that economic exploitation remains a cornerstone of systemic racism. The fight for economic justice, from demanding reparations to supporting Black-owned businesses, is not just a matter of addressing inequality. It's a fundamental challenge to the very structures that perpetuate oppression. We see this in the calls for defunding systems that do not serve the people, and the reinvestment in communities that have been historically disenfranchised. The urgency for actionable strategies, voiced by the participants, is a constant refrain in today's movements. From demanding police reform to advocating for voting rights, the call for concrete action is louder than ever. We see this in the push for legislation that addresses systemic racism, the mobilization of voters in key elections, and the ongoing efforts to hold those in power accountable. The emphasis on building economic and political power through community organizing and civic engagement is essential for translating demands into lasting change. The prescient anticipation of future unrest, voiced in 1973, has become a grim reality. The resurgence of white supremacist violence, the continued killings of unarmed Black individuals, and the widespread protests that followed are stark reminders that the struggle for justice is far from over. Today, the fight against police brutality, the demand for accountability, and the call for systemic change are not isolated incidents. They are part of a continuous struggle against the enduring legacy of racism. The 1973 discussion's focus on nationalism and anti-imperialism has evolved into a broader understanding of intersectionality and global solidarity. The recognition that oppression takes many forms, and that the struggles of Black communities are interconnected with those of other marginalized groups, is central to contemporary movements. We see this in the solidarity expressed with indigenous communities, immigrant rights movements, and global struggles against authoritarianism. In conclusion, the 1973 discussion serves as a powerful and timely reminder that the fight for racial justice is an ongoing battle. The issues raised by Davis, Torrey, and Hammer remain deeply relevant today, underscoring the enduring nature of systemic racism and the imperative for collective action. Their voices, echoing across the decades, challenge us to confront the realities of oppression, to build bridges across divides, and to work tirelessly for a future where justice and equality prevail. The struggle continues, and the lessons of the past are more vital than ever.